The laughter of colonels echoed through smoke-filled rooms, the kind of laughter meant not for humor but for dismissal. They scoffed at the Colt 1911, calling it a clumsy brick of steel. Too large to be elegant, too heavy to be practical, in their eyes. Pistols were meant for officers as ornaments of rank, a polished accessory resting at the hip, to be drawn only in parade or ceremony. One German colonel sneered across a table in occupied France, holding his own Luger P08 aloft like a piece of jewelry. He remarked that the Americans had brought nothing but a crude block of iron, while Germany's sidearm was a creation of precision, a symbol of engineering pride. Around him, younger officers smirked, the polished walnut grips of their Lugers gleaming in the lamplight. The Colt, they claimed, was a weapon for men who did not understand finesse. But there was something dangerous about laughing too soon. In the winter of 1944, as captured German officers were herded into a camp in Belgium, some still repeated the same ridicule, their words carrying the stale confidence of men certain of their nation's superiority. They mocked the pistol slung at an American guard's side, saying it looked like a farmer's tool hammered together in haste. The guard only looked back with silence, tapping his thumb against the safety, knowing something the prisoners did not yet grasp. Letters later recovered from a colonel in the Wehrmacht reveal the arrogance of that moment. He wrote to his brother, "Their sidearm is grotesque, thicker than a child's wrist. It cannot be serious. Ours is a Luger, a marvel. Theirs, a piece of railway iron. It was a line meant to boast, but it now reads like foreshadowing, the arrogance of a man who had not yet seen what that crude iron could do." As the colonels laughed, they failed to notice the rhythm of history shifting. Factories in Hartford, Connecticut, have been working night and day since 1917 to refine that very block of iron. More than 2 million units would eventually be produced for World War II alone, each tested by inspectors who allowed no weakness, no flaw. While German officers imagined a pistol as an ornament, American doctrine treated it as a lifeline. The opening scene lingers on that contrast: a dark wooden table, cigars burning low, a circle of men certain that beauty was strength. In the shadows nearby, a weapon rested quietly, its frame oiled, its magazine loaded, built not for admiration, but for survival. A silence, heavier than laughter, hung around it, waiting. And then the question lingers, suspended in the air like smoke above a lamp when the first shot rang out. Who would still be laughing? The pride surrounding the Luger P08 was not just about mechanics, it was cultural, almost spiritual, woven into the identity of German officers who carried it. To them, the Luger was not merely a pistol, but an emblem of refinement, the extension of German engineering supremacy that had dazzled the world since the turn of the century. With its distinctive toggle lock action and sleek, compact form, it felt less like a weapon of war and more like a work of art resting in a velvet case. German officers often spoke of the Luger in hushed tones, as if it were a violin crafted by Stradivari. A diary recovered from a major in the Luftwaffe contained a single boast during the autumn of 1941. The Luger sits perfectly in the hand, its balance. Its weight, there is no comparison. It is the mark of a gentleman soldier. No other nation possesses such a weapon. That confidence radiated across mess halls and barracks, where younger recruits listened with admiration, believing their officers held a weapon destined to dominate close combat. The pistol's reputation was further bolstered by propaganda. Posters painted the Luger as a badge of modernity, a fusion of elegance and lethality. In Berlin cafes, officers returning from leave would set their Lugers on the edge of tables while sipping strong coffee. The gesture calculated to impress civilians. Women admired it. Factory workers whispered about it. A finely tuned instrument, precise in its action yet also fragile in ways they refused to admit. By contrast, the Colt 1911 was almost invisible in the culture of pride. To German eyes, it was brutish and oversized, a weapon designed without grace. How could such an ungainly pistol represent a modern army, one colonel reportedly asked while inspecting captured American gear in 1943. To him, the Colt represented everything crude about America: raw, industrial, obsessed with quantity over artistry. He could not imagine men placing faith in such a tool. But arrogance has a way of building blinders, for while the Germans polished their Lugers and treated them as heirlooms, American soldiers regarded their sidearms with an entirely different philosophy. To them, the Colt was not about elegance, It was about trust. They did not caress it like a treasure. They checked it like a lifeline. That contrast between the officer's pride and the soldier's survival was about to be tested in the most merciless of proving grounds, in the mud of Europe, in the choking dust of North Africa, and in the sweltering jungles of the Pacific. Pistols would be asked to do more than gleam under soft light. They would be asked to fire when nothing else would, and that is when the myth of the Luger would begin to fracture, or strips away illusions faster than any critic's words. In the clean rooms of staff headquarters, officers could debate design and elegance, but in the front lines, only function mattered. By 1943, the fields of Europe and the islands of the Pacific had become graveyards of machinery. Dust-clogged rifle chambers, mud-sealed bolts shut, sand-scratched precision parts until they ground like millstones. Soldiers cursed their weapons when they froze in their hands at the very moment survival depended on a single shot. A German prisoner of war, later interviewed at a camp in Louisiana, recalled his moment of disbelief. His Luger had jammed in the Ardennes after only a handful of rounds, its slide locked by mud. I struck it against my boot, tried again, nothing. Then I saw the American. His pistol, this Colt, he pulled it and it thundered. Again, again, again. It did not stop. His words carried no humor, only the reluctant awe of a man forced to witness reliability in its purest form. The American .45 was not immune to dirt, but its design gave it tolerance, where the Luger demanded surgical cleanliness. The Colt 1911 absorbed punishment like a workhorse, wide tolerances in its slide. Its powerful recoil spring, its straight blowback action, these made it crude in appearance but brutally resilient. Soldiers could dip it in water, shake it once, and fire. They could fall face first in mud, wipe the grip across a sleeve, and trust it to work. At Guadalcanal, diaries describe Marines firing their Colts when Japanese soldiers stormed trenches at night, bayonets flashing in the dark, rifles jammed, bolts refused to cycle. But the .45 answered every pull of the trigger. One Marine, Private First Class Robert Harris, wrote in 1942, "I kept squeezing until the pistol was empty. I thought it would choke with the mud all over us, and it just kept going. I never felt alone with it in my hand." These scenes did not go unnoticed by prisoners, German and Japanese soldiers, captured after battles, whispered among themselves about the pistol that refused to quit, in barracks lit dimly by lanterns. Some ridiculed it even then, perhaps to ease their wounded pride, but others admitted what they had seen with their own eyes, a weapon that defied the chaos of war. And so, on the ground, where survival balanced on a knife's edge, theories of beauty and refinement collapsed. What mattered was whether a trigger pull ended with silence or thunder, for many. The Colt 1911 was the difference between life continuing or stopping forever. The silence after those shots was often more powerful than the noise itself. When the Colt 1911 fired, it did not sing, it roared. The sound was low, heavy, and final, like the slam of iron doors in an empty hall. The .45 ACP cartridge it carried was unlike the quick, sharp crack of a Luger. German officers described their pistol's note as crisp, elegant, even delicate. But when they first heard the Colt thunder across no man's land, they realized it was something else entirely. Each report was not a chirp, but a hammer, striking with the rhythm of inevitability. The bullet itself was a symbol of American philosophy. At 230 grains, the .45 ACP round was nearly twice the weight of the German 9mm, slower, yes, but relentless. A soldier struck by it often compared the impact to being hit by a club. Medical reports from the Western Front in 1918 recorded fractured ribs and shattered bones, where lighter rounds merely punctured flesh. During the Normandy campaign of 1944, U.S. Army medics filed statistics showing that .45 caliber wounds were among the most decisive in close combat, stopping advancing soldiers even at point-blank range. It was not about elegance, it was about certainty. In one confiscated diary from a German infantry captain near St. Lo, he described the first time his men faced American paratroopers. "We laughed at their pistols. Then the sound came thick, booming, unlike ours. We saw one shot drop a man so suddenly that others froze. It was not speed, it was power, as if the bullet carried more than lead." The entry ended abruptly, with ink smudges, as though written in haste before capture. The psychological effect was as important as the physical. Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal reported their disbelief at Marines firing 45 pistols from muddy foxholes, rounds punching through foliage and helmets. One prisoner whispered to an interpreter, "It does not need to be fast. It only needs to be certain." Such words carried weight, spoken not with admiration, but with resignation. The recognition that precision could fail, but force rarely lied. The Colt's power reshaped trust in battle, in the hedgerows of Normandy, when rifles jammed in the rain. Men fell back on the sidearm with the big cartridge, in the jungles of New Guinea, where humidity corroded weapons. The pistol's bark was reassurance in the night. At Bastogne. Surrounded and starving in December 1944, officers issued Colts to supply clerks and cooks because they knew, even in untrained hands, it could defend a position. And always. The sound lingered, deep, resonant, unyielding. Soldiers who survived remembered that tone long after. Not the high crack of the Luger, not the chatter of the MP40, but the heavy thump that ended arguments in an instant. It was not just a pistol firing, it was certainty given form. By the middle years of the war, the Colt 1911 had become more than steel and powder. For American soldiers, it was trust embodied in a weapon that always answered. They did not boast about it the way German officers boasted of their Lugers, nor did they display it like a medal. Instead, they carried it with the quiet assurance that when everything else failed, when rifles clogged with mud, when machine guns overheated, when grenades ran out, this pistol would still speak. Veterans' diaries reflect this deep, almost superstitious bond. Sergeant James O'Connor of the 101st Airborne scribbled a note during the siege of Bastogne in December 1944. Rifles froze, food froze, even men froze. The Colt still fired. I rubbed the barrel on my coat sleeve, put in the mag, and she answered. I swear that sound was warmer than any fire. His words were echoed by countless others, men who found comfort not in prayer books or medals, but in the cold weight on their hip. The ritual of trust became cinematic in its simplicity. A soldier would clean it with a rag, often just once a week. He would slide the magazine in, check the chamber, and holster it again. And when the moment came, whether in the smoke of a foxhole or the sudden terror of hand-to-hand combat, he drew it, pulled the trigger, and felt the blast. It was a cycle so familiar that men said the pistol always kept its promise. Prisoners of war noticed this faith. In camps across Texas and Iowa, German officers muttered about how casually Americans treated their sidearms. They expected the pistol to be admired like the Luger, but instead they saw young GIs cleaning it with little more than a rag and spitting on the slide to wipe off dirt. Yet when tested, the pistol worked flawlessly. The contrast stung. They treat it like a tool, one POW remarked, but it behaves like a king. The difference lay in philosophy. To Americans, beauty was not in polished steel, but in certainty. The Colt was ugly, but it never lied. That reliability forged bonds stronger than any national myth, because every soldier knew if the rifle stopped, if the machine gun jammed, if the battlefield collapsed into chaos. The Colt would still be there like a last friend who never turned away. And so, by 1944, the Colt had become not just a sidearm, but a heartbeat of survival. Each shot was not just a bullet, it was reassurance in the void. If you had been one of those soldiers, freezing in the Ardennes or sweating in the Pacific, would you have cared about elegance or would you have prayed for certainty? Comment below. Whispers often spread faster in captivity than on the battlefield, in barracks fenced with barbed wire, under the watch of American guards. German and Japanese prisoners carried their pride like a fragile mask. They still spoke of their Lugers and Nambus as refined tools of war, but as days dragged on, the stories turned bitter. The gossip that moved between cots at night carried a different tone, resentment mixed with reluctant respect. One Wehrmacht officer at a camp in Texas was overheard muttering to another, "Our Lugers failed us. Their Colt, it fired in mud, it fired in snow. Even when it should not, it fired." His companion, unwilling to accept defeat even in words, tried to laugh it away. But the silence that followed revealed the truth. They all knew it. In Iowa, POW diaries captured similar admissions. A lieutenant wrote, "I was proud of my pistol, but it jammed when I needed it. The Americans' weapon did not. It is crude, yes, but it is honest. That honesty won battles we could not. It was an acknowledgement that hurt more than wounds, because it struck at the very heart of German engineering pride. Propaganda back home had painted the Colt as clumsy, unsophisticated, a relic of a less advanced nation. Yet those same prisoners now saw American guards holstering it casually, as though it were nothing remarkable. At lunch, factory workers in Illinois joked about stamping their initials inside the pistol grips, because so many were being produced each week that the work blurred together. One worker remembered telling her friend over coffee, "We don't build them to be pretty. We build them to work. Every time." That philosophy had crossed the ocean and carved its mark into the minds of enemies. The bitterness grew into reluctant admiration. Officers who once scoffed now spoke quietly of the pistol's endurance. One German colonel finally admitted to an interrogator, "Excellence did not save us. Precision is meaningless if it stops in the dirt. Your pistol, it never betrayed you." His words were less a confession than an epitaph for a weapon that had symbolized pride but failed when tested by mud, rain, and blood. The gossip hardened into memory. By 1945, the reputation of the Colt 1911 was no longer carried only by its users, but by its former enemies. It had entered the mythology of war, not through elegance or beauty, but through the stubborn truth of its function. And here lies a question for you, watching now in life. Do we overvalue refinement and appearance, or do we place our trust in the things that never betray us, however plain they may seem? When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the memory of the Colt 1911 lingered, etched into the minds of both those who carried it and those who once mocked it. For American soldiers returning home, it was not the elegance of their weapons they recalled, but the reliability. Veterans spoke of the pistol as if it were an old companion, scratched, heavy, sometimes uncomfortable on the hip, yet always loyal. German prisoners released after years of captivity carried home a different memory. Many confessed privately that what had surprised them most was not the vastness of American industry, nor the endless supply lines, but the small pistol that had never failed. One former officer, interviewed in Munich in 1947, admitted, "I cannot forget the sound. Deep, certain. It was not like our Luger's crack. It was like a hammer. Once you heard it, you knew the fight was finished." The Colt's durability was reflected in numbers too staggering to ignore. More than 1.9 million pistols were produced during World War II alone, stamped with the names of Colt, Remington Rand, Ithaca, Union Switch and Signal, and even Singer, a sewing machine company drafted into the war effort. Inspectors tested each weapon rigorously. Random samples were dragged through mud, frozen in ice, baked in dust, then fired again and again. The pistol spoke. The symbolic power of the Colt 1911 extended beyond factories and battlefields. For many veterans, its sound became the rhythm of memory. Soldiers who fought in the Ardennes wrote decades later that they still dreamed of that low, booming report, like the heartbeat of survival. A Marine who survived Iwo Jima admitted in an oral history interview that he had nightmares of darkness and sudden attack. But in those dreams, the Colt always answered. Time transformed ridicule into reverence. The pistol, once dismissed as crude iron, became a legend, one that shaped not only combat but identity. It became a reminder that beauty fades, but trust endures. Where refinement failed in mud and blood, stubborn reliability carved its place in history. The closing image is stark. Cinematic, a Colt 1911 resting on a rough wooden table. Evening light filters through a window, striking the blued steel until it glows like deep water. Around it lies silence, broken only by the faint echo of shots from the past, slow, steady, deliberate. Bang, bang, bang. Each report fading like a heartbeat in the distance, reminding us that what mattered most was not appearance, but certainty. The pistol no longer needs to prove itself. History already heard the answer. History often preserves the grand machines of war, the tanks, the bombers, the battleships that shook the earth and sea. Yet sometimes, it is the smallest objects that leave the deepest imprint on memory. The Colt 1911 was one such object, a pistol mocked as crude, dismissed as heavy, and ridiculed as inelegant. And yet, through mud, blood, and years of relentless combat, it became a quiet symbol of survival. What mattered in the end was not the shine of polished steel, nor the praise of engineers who sought perfection in elegance. What mattered was the moment when a soldier's hands trembled, when chaos closed in, and when the trigger needed to respond. In those moments, the Colt did not hesitate. Its report was heavy, certain, final. That reliability forged a bond that outlasted uniforms, nations, and even the war itself. Some veterans would later describe the sound of its shot echoing in their dreams. Others remembered the feel of its grip, worn smooth by months of combat, like a friend's hand never letting go, even among former enemies. The pistol remained a subject of whispered acknowledgement, proof that strength sometimes wears the plainest clothes. We can still imagine the image that closes this story: a pistol laid gently on a wooden table, sunlight catching its steel, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a relic of endurance, of trust, of the human need for something that never falters. The echo of its shots lingers not in the ears, but in the heart. And perhaps that is the lesson hidden in its history, that in the end, the world does not remember what looked refined, but what endured.